Good day, everyone. So today we are going to discuss lesson 7. It is all about the types and functions of society. As we have discussed in our previous chapter, society is defined as a large group of people who are living together in an organized way wherein they are having some commonalities with each other. And in this chapter, we are going to discuss what are the types and the functions being played by the society. To start with, let me say that societies are not homogeneous, meaning that societies are different from each other. And this statement may be interpreted in two ways. The first one is that no society has homogeneous membership, meaning that the members of a certain society are not having only one characteristic, or they are having that varied characteristics with each other, but they are sharing some commonalities with each other. And the second one is that the mankind is composed of varied societies. So, because we have different beliefs and we have different practices in our society, we are being grouped according to that beliefs and practices we are having. So now, let us discuss the different types of societies. The first type of society we have is the pre-industrial societies, which existed before the rise of the Industrial Revolution somewhere between the 16th century. So before the Industrial Revolution and the widespread use of machines, societies were just small, rural, and dependent largely on local resources. Economic production was just limited to the amount of labor a human being could provide, and there were few specialized occupations available in the society. And the very first occupation was that of the hunter-gatherer, or our first type of society. The first type of pre-industrial society we have is the Hunter-Gatherer Society. Hunter-gatherer societies demonstrate the strongest dependence on the environment of the various types of pre-industrial societies. Why? It is because hunter-gatherers are mainly relying on the surroundings for their survival. So, 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, people were just hunting wild animals and they were foraging for uncultivated plants for their food. So, because resources were just very scarce, the group moved to a new area to find sustainability of their resources. So this led to people for them to be nomadic, meaning that they don't have permanent settlement. So they were moving from one place to another in search for food. And these societies were common until several hundred years ago, but today only few hundred remain in existence. So this is the hunter-gatherer society. So they were very dependent on the environment. So the next type we have is the pastoral societies. Changing conditions and adaptations led some societies to rely on the domestication of animals where circumstances permitted. Roughly around 7,500 years ago, human societies began to recognize that their ability to tame and breed animals and to grow and cultivate their own plants. So people have realized that they can breed animals and that this can be their sources of their different basic needs such as food, clothing, or even their transportation. So pastoral societies rely on the domestication of animals as a resource for survival. Unlike earlier hunter-gatherers who depended entirely on existing resources to stay alive, pastoral groups were able to breed livestock for food, clothing, and transportation, which wherein they also created a surplus of goods. So they still remained nomadic because they were forced to follow their animals to fresh feeding grounds. So because of lacking of the water supply and permanent source of food for their animals, so they still remain to be nomadic. And around the time that pastoral societies emerged, Specialized occupations began to develop and societies commenced trading with local groups. It is because they can already produce different products such as food, clothing from their animals, so they can now trade it with other local societies. The next type of pre-industrial society we have is the horticultural societies. So around the same time that pastoral societies were on the rise, so this type of society also developed, which is based on the newly developed capacity for people to grow and cultivate plants. So previously, the depletion of a region's crops or water supply forced pastoral societies to relocate in search of food sources for their livestock. So there is this happening that there is having the depletion of the crops and water supply that made the pastoral societies to be nomadic. So they were horticultural societies formed in areas where rainfall and other conditions allowed them to grow stable crops. So this type of society developed on that places where there is a certain amount or the needed amount of rainfall for them to cultivate their crops. So it is quite similar to hunter-gatherers in that they largely depend on the environment for survival, but since they didn't have to abandon their location to follow resources, they were able to start permanent settlements. And this created more stability and more material goods and became the basis for the first revolution in human survival. So the main characteristic of the horticultural society or its main feature is the start of permanent settlement. So people are having the permanency in their living because they didn't need to look for areas where they can look for food or they can find food. So they now have that permanent sources of food and other needs. That's why they started these permanent settlements. The last type of pre-industrial society we have is the agricultural society. So during the time of pastoral and horticultural societies, people were just using small and temporary tools such as digging sticks or hoes for agriculture. So for cultivating their plants, they were just using small tools. Whereas in agricultural societies, people learned how to rely on permanent tools for their survival. So around 3000 BCE, an explosion of new technology known as the agricultural revolution made farming possible and profitable. So in this type of society, farmers learned to rotate the types of crops grown on their fields and to reuse waste products such as fertilizers, which led to better harvest and bigger surpluses of food. So here, people realized that they don't have to grow only one type of plant for a specific field in a year. So after they have harvested the one type of crop, for example, corn, then they may plant another type of food there, for example, is palay, for them to have enough resources and different foods. And farmers also learned to use new tools for digging and harvesting, wherein it is made up of metal, and this made them more effective and longer lasting. So this had been the reason why human settlements grew into towns and cities, and particularly bountiful regions became centers of trade and commerce, because they can now produce different types of crops and food on their agricultural lands. So they are using this to trade and commerce with other local societies. This also is the age wherein people had the time and comfort to engage in more contemplative and thoughtful activities. So people now started to have music, poetry, and philosophy. And because of this period became referred to as the dawn of civilization by some because the development of leisure and humanities. Craftspeople were able to support themselves through the production of creative, decorative, and thought-provoking aesthetics objects and writings. As resources became more plentiful, social classes became more divisive. It is because those who had more resources could afford better living and developed into a class of nobility or the higher class. Difference in social standing between men and women also increased, and as cities expanded, ownership and preservation of resources became a pressing concern. So the last type of pre-industrial society we have is the feudal societies. The ninth century gave rise to feudal societies. These societies contained a strict hierarchical system of power based around land ownership and protection. So the nobility known as the landlords, they placed vassals in charge of pieces of land. So in return for the resources that the land provided, vassals promised to fight for their lords. So the vassals here refers to those people who are working for the landlord. So they are having their loyalty to their landlords, and in return the landlords are giving the vassals certain rights, and they are having this what is so-called individual pieces of land known as the fiefdoms or fief, wherein it is being cultivated by the lower class. In return for maintaining the land, peasants were guaranteed a place to live and protection from outside enemies. So these lower class or these peasants working for that fiefdoms or individual pieces of land, they were working for the landlords, and in return they can live here and they are enjoying protection from their landlords from outside enemies. So the power was being handed down through family lines, with peasant families serving lords for generations and generations. But unfortunately, the social and economic system of feudalism failed and was replaced by capitalism and the technological advances of the industrial era. So why does feudalism failed? It is because feudalism became a complicated type of social and economic system. It is because it formed a new strata in the society. It formed a new social stratification wherein the landlords became so powerful that they are enjoying too much privilege that the lower classes are not happy with. And these landlords became so powerful, that's why the lower classes have revolutionized over these feudal lords. That's why capitalism replaced this feudalism.